My favorite of the Turkish Yoke martyrs is St. Timothy of Esphigmenou. And I've got a lot like him, although I think his story is the most unique of all of the former apostates. I have a lot of former apostates that I pray to. They apostatize either because they had been taken as children, or they were afraid, or they were in a situation where there was money and there was pleasures of the flesh, different reasons. And then they came to themselves. And then they went through a process where they repented, where they went to the bishop or the priest, and they were given absolution, and they said, you should work out your salvation with fear, go to the holy mountain, be a monk, and God will forgive your sin, which is true, that's true. But their heart wouldn't allow that, so they, usually under an experienced elder, they would kind of have, if we can call it in a kind of impious way, boot camp for a little while, and become prepared for martyrdom. And then they would usually go to the place where they had been previously apostatized, or maybe the original place. And then they would make their confession and be tortured and be killed. Father Nicholas talked about this yesterday, but you really can't talk about it too much, because it's just such a beautiful story that the human heart can fail, and then the human heart can be filled with God and find paradise. If you're not taking advantage of things, if you don't go to church very much, if you don't come to confession very much, communion very much, if you're always coming late to church, if you don't take advantage of the Saturday liturgy when we instituted, or Wednesdays and Thursdays, which we regularly serve, well, that's to your loss. But God can make up any loss. I just wouldn't count on it, We can count on God's grace, but if we have the opportunity to garner more grace, we should do it. God can save anyone, though, even people that have lived a profligate way or not taken advantage of the freedoms they had before they were taken away. So this is the story of St. Timothy. It's just a marvelous story. He was an apostate, but he was an apostate with a purpose, with a reason. He was a false apostate, shall we say. His wife was taken from him by a Turk who was enamored with her beauty. He lusted after her. He wanted to add her as a trophy to his harem. So he had yet another, and he forcibly converted her to Islam. And Timothy was bereft. He had 2 children. He loved his wife. He wanted to save her from the clutches of the demons. So he did something that's outrageous, not recommended, but he did it. He converted to Islam, officially. I mean, that's with circumcision and everything else, because that was a sign that was obvious. Christians were not circumcised, and the adherents of Islam are circumcised. So he could prove, I'm a Turk, and I want my wife back. And since they basically treated women more or less as property, he could basically make a financial arrangement and have her back. When he had her back, he told her that it was all a sham, and they had an appearance for a little while of being an Islamic couple, but he made plans to escape so that she would go to a monastery and he would go to the holy mountain. And so they did. They dropped their kids off with relatives in a village that they had lived in, and they went their separate ways to pray, to fast, to repent. And we don't really know exactly what happened to his wife. May it be that she found paradise. But we do know what happened to him. So he goes on the holy mountain, and he's living an exemplary life as a monk, fasting and praying and doing thousands of prostrations. Yes, thousands. It's really possible to do that. Can you believe it? I mean, it's hard for us to crank out 12 or something like that. Thousands of prostrations a day, and being an exemplary monk. But he went to his spiritual father, and he ached to expiate this false apostasy. He laid down his life for his friends, that is, for his wife and for his children. But he still had to make a witness. So he went through this really rigorous process with his spiritual father. And then his spiritual father said, "You're ready." And he goes off the mountain. His instructions were to go off the mountain to change into regular Christian clothes, not monastic clothes. And that was really to protect the holy mountain, because the holy mountain was always in danger that the Turkish army was just going to go there and just tear everybody up. So he goes to he's going to go to an area, and his spiritual father told him, no matter what, don't talk to your children, because he was going to go through an area where his children were. Don't make any contact with him. So he's on the outskirts of town. He's seen by a friend. That friend goes to the children and says, your father's here. And they run after him. And he runs away like an obedient monk. He doesn't say a word to them. Can you imagine running away from your children crying after you, not understanding what's going on? Can you imagine that moment? I want to have an icon put up right there. That's that moment when he's running and they're clutching after him. I don't know, usually you put other icons like the Last Judgment or sometimes the Dormition or something, but I want to put that up. We'll see if I can get away with it. And then he makes his martyrdom, and then his clothes were brought back, and his children then realized what had happened, that he had been martyred for their sake. It's a wonderful story. It's incredible what the human spirit is capable of when the heart is filled with God. So he's an extraordinary one. Most of them were people who just apostatized for flimsy reasons or because they were afraid, and then later on repented. He apostatized in name only, basically, but he really physically showed the signs of apostasy. I'm sure he took circumcision in order to prove that he was a Turk. But then, of course, the sign of the cross was his final sign, was the final symbol for him. And he died a martyr and is in paradise. And I am confident that his children and his wife are with him in paradise. So that's one story, and there's a bunch of other ones. They're just fantastic and beautiful. And I always tell you, you should be reading the lives of the saints, and you should be praying to these saints, particular ones that really touch you, and doing prostrations to them and begging them for help. You might be in their situation someday. You might be in a situation where the government is so oppressive, so onerous, that they are pushing you to do something that you know is wrong. And you know if you do it, it would be a terrible sin. But if you don't do it, there will be consequences, horrible consequences for you or for your loved ones. You got to get ready for that moment. I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but I think we should be realistic and think that these kind of times are coming. In 1900, do you think people in Russia were thinking, boy, we're going to have a revolution soon? Even after the Russo-Japanese War, they're probably thinking, Russia's going to go on forever. It's a great empire. And then things collapsed very, very quickly. So things could collapse. Let's not be afraid of the collapse. Let's not be running around looking like Chicken Little into the sky to see if it's going to fall on us. But let's do the things that are in these epistles and these